Okay. My name is Hayat Bualuan. I teach cultural studies. My subject is, as you notice, Simone de Beauvoir, the second sex. Simone de Beauvoir, French modern feminist philosopher and novelist, was born in Paris on the 9th of January 1908 into a middle-class milieu. At early age, she studied philosophy and was educated at the Sorbonne. The publication of her book, The Second Sex, in 1949, a philosophical and a feminist accomplishment, made of her an eminent figure in the history of women's emancipation. She died in 1986. To delve into the historical and philosophical context of Beauvoir's writing is an ambitious subject for this lecture. I will confine myself to few aspects that influenced Beauvoir's writing. I start with the French Revolution in 1789 and the motions of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which continued to influence the intellectual circles in 20th century Paris. French materialist philosophy, social history, and socialist ideas were significant influences on the development of communism and major contributors to Marx's ideas. In 1944, Beauvoir founded with Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, and Raymond Aron the monthly review Les Temps Modernes, which took its name from Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times. For 25 years, this review was a forum for political and philosophical debate. De Beauvoir was influenced by Hegel, Husserl, Heidegger, Marx, and others. Her focus on the significance of lived experience and on the ways in which the meaning of the world are revealed in language were influenced by Husserl and Heidegger. Heidegger turned to the language of poetry for this revelation. Beauvoir, Camus, and Sartre turned to the language of the novel and drama. This allowed her to explore the limits of calling on others to take up one's political projects, to portray the temptation of violence, to enact her existentialist ethics of freedom, responsibility, joy, and generosity, and to examine the intimacies and complexities of our relationship with others. After having rejected feminist affiliation, Beauvoir declared herself a feminist in 1972 interview in Le Nouvel Observateur, and joined other Marxist feminists in founding the journal Questions Féministes. I'm not going here to go into the subject of feminism, its history, and different approaches. You will no doubt discuss this in your classes. I'm going to mention briefly about socialist and Marxist feminism, and then go to existentialism, which is considered one of the basic foundation for the second sex. Socialist feminism is an approach to women's liberation, dealing mainly with the economic and cultural sources of women's oppression. While Karl Marx's focus is on the role of capitalism in the oppression of women, socialist feminists combine Marx's argument of class distinction, private property, and the radical feminist theory of the role of gender and patriarchy. I come now to existentialism. Simone de Beauvoir is influenced by her long-life companion, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher in the 20th century. De Beauvoir's insistence that there is no such thing as feminine nature, that femininity is not an essence and that there is no such a thing as eternal feminine or a feminine will, all this is based primarily on one of Sartrean existentialist principles that man's existence defines his essence, and that there is no such a thing as human nature, an essence common to all humans, determining what a human ought to be. Rather, there is only a human condition into which man and woman are thrown equally into existence without self-definition, and they have reality only through their engagement in the world. In brief, Sartrean existentialism is a branch of philosophy mostly concerned with the idea of choice, meaning, and the limits of existence. The task of man, de Beauvoir says, is to fashion the world by giving it meaning. An existent is nothing else than what he does. A human being is not anything. He has to be measured by his acts. This reminds us of what Hegel says in this context, quote, a being exists insofar as it acts, and acts insofar as it exists, unquote. Existentialism in general focuses mainly on two peculiarities. First, freedom and responsibility. Individuals are responsible for the ethical consequences of their actions, their successes and failures. The second characteristic in the preoccupation is the preoccupation with anxiety, fear, and death. Anxiety, anguish, an inescapable sense of deep responsibility for one's own choice and action. Fear, dread from lack of purpose, especially concern or meaning in the universe. Death, all the problems of life finds a silent solution in death. As soon as man comes to life, says Heidegger, he is at once old enough to die. He is, in fact, a being towards death. De Beauvoir focuses on joy as well as anxiety. She rejoices in shedding old values and the dynamic aspect of creating values. She also emphasizes the need for relationship. One chooses among actions that involve others who will burden or facilitate one's freedom. She also tackles another theme of existentialist literature, self-deception or bad faith. Bad faith is believing in something about yourself or the world, even in the face of very obvious counter-evidence. Women's failure to take responsibility for their freedom is an example of bad faith, and as the trap of patriarchal society, believing that women are happier in rejecting their freedom. De Beauvoir's philosophical thought is not only existentialist, it takes existentialism as its foundation. The existentialist philosopher, she says, chooses, acts, desires, feels, is anxious, and knows that meaning must be made. She pushes her readers to experience love and engagement with the world and human reality rather than to abstractly possess wisdom. Women should engage themselves. I come now to the central thesis in the second sex. The second sex is rated as Simone de Beauvoir's masterwork and one of the most influential analyses of women's situation in the 20th century. Its central thesis is that since patriarchal times, women have been forced to occupy a secondary place in the world in relation to men. According to Simone de Beauvoir, woman has always been man's dependent, and the two sexes have never shared the world in equality. Quote, What specially defines the situation of a woman is that she, a free and autonomous being, like all human creatures, nevertheless discovers and chooses in a world where men compel her to assume the status of the other. Needless to add that the whole feminine history has been man-made, unquote. I come to Beauvoir's story in The Second Sex. Before writing The Second Sex, de Beauvoir tried to write about her own self. Falling in love with philosophy since the age of 16, she was moved by its influence and the existentialism of the day that rules out any divorce between philosophy and real life, which made her realize that talking about herself impelled her finally to say, quote, "I am a woman," unquote. And on this assertion are based all further analysis. Hence, The Second Sex shows us, along with other important subjects, what it means to be called a woman or to call oneself a woman. When de Beauvoir says, quote, "I am a woman," unquote, she means, first of all, that she is making the verb to be, signifying existence, is, always becoming, a process that only comes to an end in death. Secondly, she means that, quote, "there are women in the world, and I, Simone de Beauvoir, am one of them," unquote. However, she does not tell us what kind of woman she is, for the woman's whatness defines her essence, which is in the making. Woman, it follows, is not a complete reality, but rather a becoming, always in the process of making herself what she is in interaction with the world. This is how de Beauvoir uttered her well-known phrase that, quote, "one is not born, but rather becomes a woman," unquote. Following this reasoning, she has to say also that one is not born, but rather becomes a man. Man and woman are human beings as much as they are man and woman. At this point, de Beauvoir distinguishes between two terms, sex and gender. Sex, as female designates, a fixed and self-identical set of natural corporeal facts, biological and physiological characteristics that define men and women. This is sex. Woman, or gender, designates a variety of modes through which these facts acquire cultural meaning. Socially constructed roles, behavior, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. Becoming a gender is an impulsive yet mindful process of interpreting a cultural reality laden with sanctions, taboos, and prescriptions rather than a radical act of creation. I come now to women's situation. De Beauvoir describes the woman's situation. Quote, "The situation of women is that she, a free and autonomous being, like all human creatures, nevertheless finds herself living in a world where men compel her to assume the state of the other. Man, conceiving himself as the essential being, the subject, has made woman into the inessential being, the object, the other." Following Hegel, de Beauvoir maintains that, quote, "otherness as such is a fundamental category in human thought," unquote. She suggests that, quote, "the transition to a state of culture is marked by the development of binary oppositions," unquote. This phenomena she associates with the Hegelian master-slave dialectic. Things become clear if we find in consciousness a fundamental hostility toward every other consciousness. The subject can be posed in being opposed to the other, the inessential, the object. It is woman who is defined through the viewpoint of the masculine subject. Beauvoir uses the Hegelian dialectic to depict the original oppression And in the case of woman, she is oppressed by virtue of her otherness. Woman is the other because she is not man. In order to become a self, she must make herself whatever to be. In spite of this, the Beauvoir does not situate man as a master and evidently woman as a slave by means of this dialectic. Simply, woman is not a slave in relation to man. She is the absolute other. This interpretation finds direct support in the second sex, when de Beauvoir maintains, quote, to regard woman as a slave is a mistake. There were women among the slaves, to be sure, but there always been free women, that is, women of religion and social dignity. They accepted man's sovereignty, and he did not feel menaced by a revolt that could make of him in turn the object. Women, the inessential, who never goes back to being the essential, to be the absolute other without reciprocity, unquote. The human couple, man and woman, is said to be an original Mitzain, being with, not two distinct and separate groups that have appeared and confronted each other in the course of history. They are thrown into existence, but their Mitzain, being together, can be lived either in separation and conflict or in friendship and solidarity. There can be a relation of otherness between equals in which conflict, though not eliminated, is relativized by reciprocity. The recognition by each of the other's freedom as equal to his or her own. If, however, the situation of the protagonist is to begin with unequal, then instead of a reciprocal relation, tension will be created, otherness will be of a second kind involving oppression. So being with can be a source of oppression or a source of transcendence. I come now to the philosophical framework of the second sex. You find all this on your fly sheet, so no problem if you follow me, okay? The philosophical framework of the second sex. The second sex is a work loaded with material driven from social history. Its philosophical framework is made up of three philosophical distinctions and a philosophical anthropology. They are as follows. First, distinction between subject and other. Second, distinction between action and function. Third, distinction between transcendence and immanence. Fourth, a philosophical anthropology, which sees the human individual as a free, autonomous, historical being who is inserted into the world by means of a body, but who is not, for all that, chained to a fixed and unaltered destiny. I start with number one, subject and the other. Subject is in the second sex is the self, consciousness, the absolute, the sovereign, and transcendent. Of course, you know who it is. It's male human beings are assigned to this category. As to the category of the other, female human beings are assigned. It is associated with submissiveness, dependence, subordination, limitation, and immanence. Number two, action and function. Actions are means whereby one sets goals, the means by which one annexes the world, the means whereby one achieves self-realization, the means by which one creates, the means whereby one lays foundations for a new future. All right, so of course you know it is the male. As to functions, action is the male. As to functions, they are simple, vital processes. That is, instinctual forms of behavior, labors which produce nothing new, cares which confine one to the present, which are endlessly repeated. Giving birth and suckling, for example, are not, according to Beauvoir, activities, they are natural functions. The distinction between action and function is to be understood as a philosophical one. It marks off two different forms of behavior and way of existing as human beings from each other. The fact that women have historically been forced to perform does not demand that the category of function is a female category, so that women's liberation would necessitate a transcendence of the feminine. Women's liberation is not the transcendence of the feminine. It is freedom from immanence, from having endlessly to perform functions, prepared from birth only to catch a man. That is to make herself his prey, and to bear children dependent on man and confined as his property in his house. It's not surprising that woman has no grasp on the world. The eternal feminine is to be explained not as an essence, but as a synthesis of economic, social, historical conditioning, unquote. These are the words of Beauvoir. I come now to number 3, transcendence and immanence. Transcendence refers to a sphere or mode of existence characterized by activity, by freedom from biological life, by freedom to burst out of the present and into the future, and by a capacity to transform the world so that it accommodates itself to one's intention. Male human beings are assigned to this category, transcendence. As to immanence, it refers to a sphere or mode of existence characterized by passivity, submission to biological facts, confinement or restriction to a situation which is uncreative and repetitive. Historically, women have accepted the category of immanence, but this does not imply they are doomed to immanence. The Beauvoir states, quote, "Woman is enticed by two modes of alienation. Evidently, to play at being a man will be for her a source of frustration, but to play at being a woman is also a delusion. To be a woman would mean to be an object, the other, and the other, nevertheless, remains subject in the midst of her resignation. The true problem for a woman is to reject these flights from reality and seek self-fulfillment in transcendence," unquote. The Beauvoir prescribes the overcoming of gender altogether. For becoming one's gender, especially for women, is sacrificing autonomy and the capacity of transcendence. The Beauvoir discusses another form of immanence, which is assumed as a choice. Those women who try through narcissism, all-consuming love, or mysticism to assume their immanence as a choice can never succeed. I'm not going to go into this. You will, I'm sure, discuss it in your classes. According to Beauvoir, freedom and love can be form of transcendence or immanence. All right. The fundamental cause of masculine domination is the consent of women to that domination. Women accept this domination. Love and freedom go together. When love leads to transcendence, it liberates the individual. The lovers would experience themselves both as self and other. When, on the other hand, the lover tries to become the absolute, the ultimate meaning of life for the beloved, he defeats himself, for the other ceases to be a free person. If the other remains a person, separation remains. If the other could be possessed completely, he would cease to be a person. So they have to be two persons and not merged in one, as it is understood. Beauvoir adds, quote, "Many nuances are possible in the relation between a man and a woman. In comradeship, pleasure, trust, fondness, cooperation, love, they can be for each other the most abundant source of joy, richness, and power available for human beings," unquote. I come to the fourth item, which is the philosophical anthropology. It is meant here a stated and defended view of what is a human being. First, a human being is a subject who achieves liberty only by continuously reaching out towards additional liberties to an indefinitely open future. Second, every human subject is a free and autonomous being. Third, a human being is a historical reality. He or she is not given, but existing to be made. Each is best conceived not in terms of what one is, but in terms of what one is capable of becoming. Fourth, each human being is a possessor of a body, which is both the means by which one negotiates the world and steps forward towards worked out projects. Thus, it is worth the effort to talk about the body. The body. As an existentialist, de Beauvoir was centrally concerned with problems of oppression and embodiment. She assumes the human body is fundamentally ambiguous. It is not a thing, it is a situation. The body has different significations in different situations. To be present in the world implies strictly, as she says, that there exists a body which is at the same time a thing in the world and a point of view on this world. Then she comes to the female body. The second sex is well known for its negative description of the female body. Being dominated by the cycles of menstruation, pregnancy, and nursing, the female body severely limits the free choice and the self-fulfillment of the woman, according to Beauvoir. Every biological process in the female body is a crisis or a trial. Pains during menstruation, horror of gestation, pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, all undermine the woman's health and even put her life at risk. Only aging women escape the servitude of production. The female body limits woman's transcendence. Biologically speaking, a woman is at a disadvantage to man. Woman is weaker than man. She has less muscular strength, can lift less heavy weight. She cannot stand with him in any fight. To all this weakness must be added the instability and the lack of self-control. It's interesting. Beauvoir sees the female body demanding so much of women's energy that it saps her potential for engaging in creative activity. This is why, quote, when women are so busy attending to their different bodies, they have no time to improve their minds, unquote. It is to be noted that despite all that has been said about the female body, de Beauvoir also says, quote, woman is a human being with a certain physiology, but that physiology in no way makes her inferior, nor does it justify her exploitation, unquote. She also maintains that women's oppression cannot be overcome except within the framework of the full abolition of human oppression. In a more philosophical vein, de Beauvoir concludes the section on biology of the second sex by arguing that women should be understood on the basis of her possibilities rather than on the basis of her limitations. I come now to a very interesting subject too. It's male supremacy and grandeur. Women then lacks relation of equality with men. To the significant figures in the world, father and husband especially, she is an inferior, not an equal. If woman is inferior, then man is superior. We have seen how de Beauvoir's analysis of the relation between man and woman assumes that all human beings desire esteem or admiration, and that they can only gain it from human beings. In her role as absolute other, woman sustains man's self-esteem by reflecting back to him an image of himself, an admiring one. Man's need to be esteemed for his sexual and erotic powers lies at the heart of his relation with woman. Grandeur, as Beauvoir constructs it, is explicitly masculine. It is available to the transcendent and thus denied to a woman. A man esteems a woman in the many ways she makes herself useful to him or satisfy his demands. For her beauty, ability to understand him and enter into his projects and enlarge his realm of experience, and, listen to this, for her willingness to argue with him and yet be defeated, and so on. A woman gains her social status from her relationship to a man. Man is active, transcendent, and in control of himself. Woman, passive and out of control. All the features of woman's training tend to bar her from the roads of revolt and adventure. At the same time, the psychic benefits that go along with social subordination. She is often, woman, often very well pleased with her role as the other. Her self-esteem is gained from he who possesses grandeur. Quote, she gathers up the crumbs that the male cares to toss to her, unquote. In another context, in the second sex, Beauvoir states, quote, historically, the specific difference between men and women is that the female has been the victim or prey of the species, destined to produce but not to create, to repeat but not to invent, to suffer but not to subdue. And because humanity values creation and invention far more than reproduction and suffering, men have been able to assume mastery. However, few women who have achieved preeminence, such as Queen Elizabeth, Saint Catherine of Siena, have done this at the expense of losing their sexual identity. These are the features that gave man grandeur and social dignity. She adds, how would one expect that a woman could show audacity, ardor, disinterestedness, and grandeur? These qualities appear only when a free being strikes forward through an open future, emerging far beyond all given activity. Woman's life, this is Beauvoir's words, devoted to cooking and washing diapers, is in no way to acquire a sense of grandeur. Few questions for you here to pursue further in your classes. Is the Beauvoir's description of women's situation still relevant in the 21st century? Has women's internalized idea about male grandeur disappeared? Has women's education and ability to share in the public sphere changed her inherited adherence to the patriarchal mentality? You answered this in your classes. And I come now to the conclusion. The Beauvoir is one of the most prolific and influential female thinkers of the 20th century. She is widely acknowledged in many ways, the leading philosophical grandparent of women's studies and contemporary feminist theory. There was an impression that the second sex focuses on sexual liberation, but one has to admit that freedom from restrictions on female sexuality is only part of a larger vision of women liberated from oppressive social constructions of femininity. The liberation that the Beauvoir appears most fundamental in this work is basically economic. Women have to work as man does. She should not be economically dependent on man, whether in marriage or outside marriage. Beauvoir's multidisciplinary work provides inspiration to a host of branches, feminist theories, literary critics, historians, philosophers, theologians, and even psychotherapists continue to draw on Beauvoir's seminal analysis. The Beauvoir's view of freedom, ambiguity, and reciprocity makes The Second Sex one of the most influential books of the 20th century. De Beauvoir develops her analysis of the political working of oppression and how the ambiguity of the human condition demands a risky freedom. The Second Sex, then, is a political analysis of women's social, historical, and cultural situation. In it, de Beauvoir rejects liberalism and instead uses a Marxist critique to argue that women as a class are so situated that they are less able and less likely than men to act on their freedom. Beauvoir goes beyond Marxism, however, in arguing that women's psychology education, and desire are so shaped by social influences that they learn to choose against themselves. Meanwhile, it is comforting to conclude with the last words of Beauvoir in The Second Sex. Quote, "It is for man to establish the reign of liberty in the midst of the world of the given. To gain the supreme victory, it is necessary for one thing, that by and through their natural differentiation, men and women unequivocally affirm their brotherhood," unquote. Thanks for your attention. Please remain because